If you've been a Christian for a while, I'm sure you know about this story or you've heard about this story before briefly. So, Jesus was in Jerusalem and then he went to the temple. And when he was in the temple, he saw people buying and selling stuff, and there were a few money changers as well. And there were people buying and selling doves. And then Jesus was angry and then he chased all of these people out. The story is written in three of the four Gospels. It's written in the book of John, the book of Matthew, and the book of Mark. And so, what is the reason? Why was Jesus angry? Like, is it a sin to sell around the vicinity of the temple? And is it wrong to do that, to have transactions there? To truly understand the answer to that question, to truly understand the motive and the reason behind why Jesus was angry, we need to understand the background of what was actually happening, the cultural background and everything else, and then we assess and we can understand slightly better the reason behind why Jesus was angry. But before we do that, there's a common misconception about the story that we have to clarify before we dig deeper into the background of the story. So, what we need to understand is that at least when I read the story, what I used to understand was that that Jesus was having an outburst of emotion. So he saw what was happening, and then he had this anger inside, and he couldn't contain it anymore. So he had to be angry. But the thing is, that's not what actually happened. Because if you look in the book of Mark, chapter 11, verse 11, you will actually see that Jesus was at the temple the day before. So when he was at the temple, in the same temple in Jerusalem, he must have seen what was actually happening. And then he actually went to Bethlehem after he was at the temple, and then the next day he came back. And then that's when he chased all of these people out. So what we need to understand that it was not a tantrum that Jesus was throwing. So it was not an outburst of emotion. He was not controlled by his emotion. He actually slept on it, and he decided that this was the right thing to do because he had time to think about it. He had time to think it through, and then he decided to came back. He decided to come back and did all those things that he did. So that's a conception that we have to clarify. So we cannot use this story to justify our outburst of emotion. Like when we saw something, we get angry, and then we do things that is governed by our emotion. It's not a justification for that. Now that we get that out of the way, so it's time for us to dig deeper into the background of this story. So the background is that back in those days, if you want to buy and sell stuff in the temple, around the temple, you have to do it in the outer court. In the outer court, and the outer court is also famously known as the court of the Gentiles. Why is it called the court of the Gentiles? Because that's where Gentiles pray and worship. They were not allowed to go to the inner court. That's for the Jews. The Gentiles are not allowed to do that. So Gentiles are just basically people who are not Jews, people who are not Israelites. So because they are not allowed to enter into the inner court, they had to pray and worship God and do whatever they need to do in the outer court. But all these people that were selling and buying stuff, they were selling all of these things and they were doing all of that in the outer court, which must have made it difficult for the Gentiles who want to worship the God of the Jews, Jehovah, Yahweh, our God. It must have been difficult for them to pray in the outer court because all these people, there were a lot of activities that were going on, so they were not able to pray. That's why if you look at the scripture, what Jesus said was that my house is supposed to be the house of prayer for all nations. All nations, not just the Jews. That happens in the same exact story. When Jesus was angry, he did all of those things, and then he said, "You den of robbers, this is supposed to be the house of prayers for all nations." You can imagine they were selling doves, they were selling a lot of sacrifices, animal sacrifices. So there must have been a lot of dirty stuff as well. So it must have been difficult for the Gentiles to pray. And so that's the reason why Jesus was not happy with what was happening, because there were Gentiles that wanted to pray, that wanted to worship Jehovah, that wanted to worship God, that wanted to worship Him, but they were not able to. So that's the reason why Jesus was angry, because there were people that wanted to worship God, but they were not given the opportunity to, or it was difficult for them to. And that's the main reason. So the heart behind it is that Jesus wanted people to be worshipers. And there were people that were willing to worship, but they were not able to. That's the main reason. The second reason is that probably It's also because they were doing business in a dishonest way, because Jesus called them robbers. So they must have been dishonest in their business. They must have cheated in some way. So that's the reason why. That's one of the reasons why. But the main reason, I believe, is that because there were people that were willing to worship God, Gentiles that were willing to worship God who were not Jews, but they were not given the opportunity to, or it was difficult for them to. So yeah, that's it. In my opinion, that's why Jesus was actually angry and he chased all of these people out.